In the beginning, Magic decks were built a little differently. See, at the time, there were basically no restrictions. The standard deck size was 40 cards, and there was no limit to how many copies of a card you could play. Hypothetically, your deck could just be War Mammoths and Giant Growths, or Time Walks and Lightning Bolts. Magic is widely accepted as the first trading card game, so the creators at the time lacked the balancing wisdom we take for granted today. They had to figure out everything as they went along since they were the pioneers. They quickly learned their lesson when the first combo deck reared its head. A deck built with no lands at all by some reports, roughly equal portions of Black Lotus, Channel, and Fireball. With these cards in your opening hand plus another Lotus or Mountain, you could win on turn 1, so playing nothing else in your deck was optimal. Of course, this made for an unfun and uninteractive experience. All matches were stripped to a simple coin toss, and so the rules changed. Deck sizes were up to 60 cards, with a 4-card limit on everything except basic lands. Soon after, certain cards were even restricted to only 1 copy allowed in decks. After the change, it took a long time for landless decks to become viable again. Magic had to slowly acquire the necessary pieces for it to be a playable strategy under the current rules. It needed cards that could somehow be used without spending mana to play them. Nowadays, the 2 most common decks you could essentially consider landless are Dredge decks and Spy decks, both of which use their own methods to self-mill and bring back creatures from the grave for free. After getting fed content about these archetypes, shout out that mill guy, and watching Strategy's no casting video a few months back, I asked myself, is landless possible in Commander? In a 60-card 1v1 format, these decks are now consistent enough to pull off their respective combos without being too awkward or clunky. But that's because they can run 4 copies of their most important pieces, bringing their total unique cards to roughly 15 to 20. In Commander, however, that number would have to be 99 completely different cards, over 5 times higher. In this video, I'm going to show you a Commander deck that never plays a single land, nor tries to, and still wins games. Buckle up, it's about to get weird. First, let me go over the rules I set for myself when making this deck. When I thought to myself, I should make a Commander deck with no lands, there was a specific angle I wanted to approach from. First, not only did I not want to have lands for mana reasons, I wanted to never have the chance to even play a single land. This means no utility lands, cards that flip into lands, or stealing lands from my opponents. If you want to see a video about that though, check out Quips and Guac's No Lands video around Smeagol helpful guide linked in the description. Second, I wanted the absence of lands to be integral to the strategy of the deck, not just an arbitrary setback. If I were to play every 0-drop artifact instead of lands, and Urza as the commander, that would be landless, but really it's just more like lands with extra steps. For me, the idea of the Balustrade Spy shell was especially appealing, even if it meant finding an extra 80 cards to fill in the gaps. If you don't know, Spy is a deck that plays little to no lands. The goal is to chain rituals into a Balustrade Spy, which reads, when this creature enters, target player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, then puts those cards into their graveyard. When the Spy enters, we turn the ability towards ourselves, and since we have no lands, we proceed to mill out our entire deck. From here, there's a number of ways we can win depending on which format we're playing. For my deck, I figured the simplest answer was probably best, and opted for a Narcomoeba, Dread Return, Thassa's Oracle line. Narcomoeba says, when this card is put into your graveyard from your library, you can put it onto the battlefield. Dread Return can be cast from the graveyard by sacrificing 3 creatures instead of paying mana, one of which being the Narcomoeba, which will then return Thoracle from the graveyard to the battlefield and win on the spot. But where does the 3rd creature come from to flashback Dread Return? Why is he the commander? Where do we get the mana for Spy, and how consistent can this really be? Let's get into it. To start, I have an entire category just for Dread Return fodder. First of these are simply 0-drop creatures, of which there are 8 baseline. Adding a discard subtheme with cards like Underworld Cookbook and Prophetic Ravings gives us an extra 2 with Blazing and Basking Root Walla. Then there's a few others we can play only once we're ready to cast the Dread Return. Capitoline Triad costs 1 less for each historic card engraved, and Pact of the Titan gives us a body for free at the cost of dying on our next upkeep, so we have to make sure to play it the turn we win. Postmortem Lunge can also be cast for just 2 life to return a 0-drop creature from our grave until end of turn, effectively serving as another creature in hand. If we don't have these, we resort to Plan B, creatures that return themselves from grave to play. Dragscape Zombie, Arclight Phoenix, and Cauldron Familiar can all come back immediately so long as you meet their requirements. Then there's cards that get into a little riskier territory. Like Narcomoeba, Creeping Chill can essentially be played for free when we mill it. While this isn't a creature, of course, it will trigger our Silver Smoke Ghoul to return on end step, and either of these coming in will also bring back Prized Amalgam on end step as well. Now, you might have noticed that these creatures return at the end of turn, but Dread Return is a sorcery. In order to sacrifice these, we have to wait until our next turn, but by then, won't we just die on our draw step? Actually, no. Since the deck runs Darksteel Colossus and Progenitus, both of these will get shuffled back into our library when we mill, giving us 2 free turns to try getting more creatures on board. And thus, Arden Angel, as goofy as it is, also has a place in this list in case we really need it. Real quick, if you're liking the video, feel free to hit the like button and dare I say, subscribe? Thank you! Alright, so pretty early into building this list, it was obvious I would need all 5 colors. At first I thought maybe Essica would be best since at least she has a relatively low cost and taps for mana, plus she works well with Rograk, Triad, and Emry that are in the list. But unfortunately there just aren't enough ways to produce 2 green mana to get her out, so that ultimately seemed pointless in the end. Then I decided to go over all the possible choices and realized, hey, Eminence is pretty busted, what if I can use the Dragon? And sure enough, there actually are dragons worth playing in our 99. First is Universal Automaton, giving us another valuable 0-drop creature since it's technically a dragon. The second is Reckless Barbarian, which serves as equally useful ritual ramp. And with these two, we also gain access to Mox Jasper, which is niche of course, but anything helps. That leads to the next question. Where do we get enough mana to cast Spy? This is probably the most challenging part of the deck, which makes sense because there's no lands. Besides the 10 free sources of mana, we have 15 other cheap sources of mana that serve as rituals or rocks or dorks. In order to bring out Spy, we need one of the 12 that produces black mana, plus any other combination that gives us 4 total. But Balustrade Spy isn't our only form of self-mill. We also have Undercity Informer, Avenging Druid, and Hermit Druid, which all have some way of decking us. Not to mention Thassa's Oracle isn't our only wincon either. In case we have it in our hand or we need to pivot for some other reason, we can also choose to reanimate Angel of Indemnity, which then brings back a permanent with mana value 4 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. When it enters, it brings back Animate Dead to then reanimate World Gorger Dragon. It's important that we take this line instead of simply reanimating the dragon because these 2 cards create an infinite loop. When World Gorger enters, it exiles all other permanents we control until it leaves the battlefield, including the Animate Dead. But when it exiles the Animate Dead, we have to sacrifice it, thus bringing back the enchantment and reanimating it from the grave again and restarting the chain. This loop infinitely exiles and returns all of our permanents, including Angel of Indemnity, which can basically bring back anything we want from the grave over and over. The only card we really need is that Cauldron Familiar I mentioned before. When it enters, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1, which will then be flickered infinitely to end the game. The third and final wincon is, of course, Goblin Charbelcher. This one is less practical since you need 3 mana from repeatable sources, but when goldfishing this deck, it did actually win a game a couple times, which is all that I can ask for. Along with Charbelcher, I threw in a little Goblin Welder package that aims to bring back either Charbelcher if we have the mana sources to use it, or God Pharaoh's Gift to bring back one of our spies. This thing has actually been surprisingly helpful for turning all of our 0-drop junk into reusable Lotus Blooms. Can't use your Mox Amber? What about your Mox Jasper? No problem, trade them in for a mere Battlesphere and net yourself more artifacts to sacrifice on later turns. In one test, I sacrificed a Memnite to bring back a Lotus Petal, which let me cast Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, then Lively Dirge with both modes to grab Spy, then bring back Spy and Memnite and win the game from there. Truly an all-star. Okay, so how consistent is this deck? Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat, it doesn't get there every time, but it's better than you might think. I'd say the average winning turn is around 8 or 9, but I've done it multiple times on 4 and 5. If you want to proxy this deck up and try it at your tables, here's my advice. Mulligan until you get one of these cards. That's why Serum Powder is in here aside from being a mana rock in lucky circumstances. Having one of these free mana sources can help you build up a small looting engine or stack up rituals for when you're ready to pop off. You can also keep a hand that has Chancellor of the Tangle with any of these, or similarly a hand with Mox Amber and Rograk, or Jasper and Automaton. You get the idea. Once you have mana and maybe a creature or two, just adapt to what you have available. If you're holding Lotus Petal, Unearth, and Golgari Grave Troll, try milling and seeing what you can find. If you have Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Birds of Paradise, maybe try getting it into the grave so you can turn all of your little henchmen into birds. Usually the plan is pretty straightforward. If you try the deck a few times, you'll understand the lines. Here's a couple back-to-back goldfishing tests just to give you some examples. In this first game, I mulligan the first hand since there's no mana. Then I find a hand that could work if I draw a 0-drop creature. It's a little risky, but I decide to take my chances and keep it, assuming I have one free mulligan. If not though, we can just ditch the Silver Smoke Ghoul. In our first turn, we draw Prophetic Ravings, then cycle the Street Wraith right into one of those 0-drops. Now we can exile the Simian Spirit Guide to cast Springleaf Drum, cast the Kobold, use the drum to tap the Kobold for mana, and bring out our Gilded Goose. On turn 2, we draw an Undercity Informer. So now that we have 2 mana on board, we just need to use the Prophetic Ravings to dig for our last source. And sure enough, we find a Lotus Petal, which lets us play the Informer and perform the combo on turn 5. In the game right after, we start off with a perfectly fine hand. With Lotus Bloom and Defense of the Heart, we are 1 mana away from fetching Spy right onto the battlefield, and sure enough, the first card we draw for turn is Mana Vault. So we just wait out the suspend and make sure to ditch the Dread Return during our discard phase. Since we have a Thassa's Oracle in hand, this is also the perfect time to play Defense of the Heart and showcase the other wincon. On our upkeep, we grab Spy, and any other creature, it doesn't really matter, then mill at our deck, and might as well grab the Narcomoeba for good measure. I forgot to flashback the Dread Return here because I got a little hasty, but we just sack any 3 of our guys to bring back Angel of Indemnity, Animate Dead, World Gorger Dragon, and after we flicker our board once, we grab Cauldron Familiar and proceed to melt the rest of the table. The deck won't always pop off on turn 5, but these 2 games happened as soon as I hit record for y'all, so I just got a little lucky here. There will definitely be games where the magic gods frown at your blasphemy and deal you 7 mulligans of torment, but that's all just part of the game. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos, feel free to leave a like and suggest another impossible build for me to do in the comments, or tell me what you think I can improve in the current list. I'm definitely always open to suggestions. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.